Well, investigators say that a Bellevue dentist set fire to medical masks and also medical gowns in an effort to burn down his own office. And tonight, he is charged with arson. King 5's Ted Land has the story.
Prosecutors say a Bellevue dentist's attempts to destroy much-needed medical equipment like masks and gowns during a global pandemic makes this crime especially appalling. According to charging documents, Mohammed Rafi, also known as Matt Rafi, tried to burn down his Bellevue dental office as he was in the process of getting evicted for not paying rent. They say he tried to set fire to the office on 2 different occasions last week. Firefighters and Bellevue police made an alarming discovery when they went inside to investigate. They found boxes of medical masks and gowns burned. Prosecutors accuse Rafi of dousing those supplies in lighter fluid and igniting them in an attempt to destroy his office. The King County Prosecutor's Office writes, quote, "The defendant's choice to use these precious items in the middle of a worldwide pandemic adds to the appalling nature of his crimes." According to charging documents, Rafi claimed he was cleaning his office, dropped an oxygen tank, and it caught fire. Police found several inconsistencies in his story and took him into custody. He's now charged with first-degree arson. Prosecutors say the dentist risked not only firefighters' lives, but also the lives of other people who were in the building where he had his office. He's scheduled to make his first court appearance in May. In Seattle, Ted Land, King 5 News.